Mike is here.
Okay, we have him.
Oh, you can hear me now.
Oh, good. Michael? I'm Robert W. Morgan, sir.
Hello, Robert W. Morgan.
I was just prepping our audience because we have a very discerning audience. Folks don't tune in unless they really are interested in knowing the truth. That's it. All we're about is finding out the truth. It doesn't matter which way the coin flips. You know, if it happens, it happens. If it's true, it's true.
Well,
and you've come up with a rather extraordinary and intriguing thing for me, being an old Navy guy.
Yeah.
You know,
myself too.
I beg your pardon?
Myself also. I'm also a Navy man, and I'm also fascinated by this story also.
Like, what were you aboard? I got to ask you that.
Repeat the question. I'm sorry.
What were you aboard in the Navy?
Okay. Well, Michael, was never in the Navy.
Oh, I thought you were. I'm sorry.
No, that was another voice back there.
Oh,
that was me, Robert.
Oh, hey, listen. Here, you got to prep me on that. All right, my friends. Well, anyway, let's get on with the subject at hand.
Okay.
Years ago, many years ago, we heard about this thing that everyone talked about, the Philadelphia experiment, or the Philadelphia project. Now, Michael, I'm not going to try to paraphrase this. This is your show. Our audience is at your disposal. Please, would you tell us exactly what, because you're the expert here, what was the Philadelphia experiment about?
Oh, well, I think Al Bielek would have been the expert. And the role that I played was the same role that you're playing right now, and that is the interviewer, the one who was curious, and really the one who wanted to find out the truth about something.
Okay.
And so it was a 3-month odyssey for me. And I really had two purposes. One was I found the whole idea of the interview, the art of the interview, just fascinating to me. And I used to listen to Art Bell a lot and Jeff Rentz. And I just thought what they did was magic. And I wanted to perhaps find a way to replicate that in my own way. And I just simply set out to find someone interesting to talk to. And this was back in 1999, and I went to a conference in Atlanta, Georgia, and there was Al Bielek, and Al Bielek is the one who is alive today and goes around and he talks about his experience with the Philadelphia experiment.
No, wait, excuse me. He is still alive, did you say?
Yeah, Al is in Florida. He's had 2 strokes.
Okay.
And he's getting up there in age, and he used to do a lot of conferences, especially around 1999, 2000, 2001. But his health has deteriorated, and I don't keep up with Al anymore. But he is the fellow that I interviewed, and I did over 24 hours of interviews with him on the Philadelphia experiment. And I don't. Can we assume that your audience knows what the Philadelphia experiment is, or?
I don't think it's a good idea to assume that. I think it's a good idea. It's a better idea, is to give them a brief outline of it, of what we're talking about, just in case.
Okay.
Because our audience, I have to tell you,
right.
And I'm really super pleased, they have a broad breadth of interest in all sorts of things. And the one thing they're interested in is exactly what you said in your article. You're interested in the truth.
Yeah.
So give our audience a background as to what the Philadelphia experiment was all about, please.
Okay. It was, at the end of the day, I, as the researcher and as one who spent a lot of time with this subject on the Philadelphia experiment, and there are many different branches to it, I don't know if I know what the truth is anymore. I really tried hard to figure it out, but it is an elusive rabbit hole, because when you talk about time travel, which I spent 3 months trying to figure out, it is this loop that goes around and around, and at the end of the day you get very confused. Probably a little bit like your Bigfoot research. There's something elusive to it that you can never put your hands around it. let me just briefly state what the Philadelphia experiment is it was back in the 40s. There was a problem with during the war, a lot of the ships that we were sending to England were getting sunk. And some scientists came up with the idea that perhaps we could use technology that they were developing to make the ship radar invisible. And so they sort of cobbled together some experiments, and the net result was not only did the ship become invisible, but it disappeared. So they just wanted to make it radar invisible, still being there, but not visible to radar, so that the German subs wouldn't sink them. So
excuse me for breaking in for a second, but
yeah.
When you say it made it invisible to radar, invisible to sight?
Yeah, the idea was to make it to where radar could not see the ship.
Okay, just through radar. Okay. So they looked for some way of cloaking it.
That's correct. Yeah, I think cloaking would be a good way of putting it. So the ship that was used for this experiment was called the USS Eldridge.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the famous name. The USS is a DE-109, I think is what they called it now. I did these interviews back in 1999 and 2000, so some of my facts may have escaped me by now, but I believe it was a DE-109.
Destroyer escort, then.
Correct. Okay.
Okay, good.
Well, a relatively small ship.
Yeah, they only have one mount up front. That's how you can tell a destroyer escort from a destroyer itself. Okay. They have one 6-inch mount up front. Okay.
Okay, so Al Bielek was apparently, he and his brother, Duncan, he was a different person actually at the time. He was known as a Cameron. But he and his brother were part of this experiment, and their job was to control the equipment that was inside the ship that actually turned the cloaking device on and off. So they turn it on, and in the process, a green haze appears. Everything goes foggy, and they go into the ether, so to speak. And
a green haze, excuse me for interrupting slightly here, but a green haze that was seen by whom?
By the people on and around the ship, and that's how Al Bielek described it, was a green haze. And also the people who were observing the experiment described it as a green haze as well. I forget the scientist's name who actually ran the whole thing, but he described that as a green haze too. So the ship actually goes into the ether, which is nowhere in time, and what Al said was that he and his brother Duncan actually jumped off the ship. They felt that the experiment had gone well beyond anything that they can control, and they just wanted to get off the ship and swim back to shore. Okay, so, however, when they got off the ship, they landed in the future. They didn't land in the water, they landed in the future. And it seemed to be 40-year cycles. So I think it was 1983 where they landed.
Really?
Yeah, so they landed in 1983, and that was in Montauk, Long Island.
They landed in the future.
They landed in the future. Now, there was a movie that was made called The Philadelphia Experiment.
Right.
Have you ever seen that one?
No, I haven't, but I'm not much on, I guess what I would term science fiction, to be honest with you. But
yeah, Michael Perry was in that movie, and and it was that movie that apparently woke up the memories of Al Bielek to the event.
Really?
Yeah.
So he says.
Complicated. And in fact, Al said that not only did they go to 1983, but they went to the year 2137 as well. And he described a future of 2137. So there are a couple places that they bounced around in the future. and eventually they came back to the experiment, shut down all of the equipment that was on it by using an axe and destroying the vacuum tubes that were controlling the electrical flow. But before the ship materialized back in the harbor, Duncan, his brother, jumped out and went back to 1983. So it was an experiment that had a lot of offshoots to it. It had a relationship to Montauk, which is in Long Island, and Montauk was a key for a lot of mind control experiments that happened. And that's where all the things with the little boys that disappeared and all that happened in Montauk. According to Al, there was extraterrestrial interest in the experiment because the process of this ship going to the future and back, caused a tear in space-time. And through that tear in space-time, large numbers of extraterrestrial craft could come into our dimension. So that was their interest in this whole thing. And in fact, it was through reptilians, as he described it, that gave us a lot of this technology that was eventually used.
May I ask, is Joe Decker on board, by the way?
No, he isn't, but I think we have Jimmy with us.
Okay, so I just want to make sure no one's ignored here. But let me ask you something, sir.
Yes.
Bottom line, you've met the gentleman that made this report to you, am I correct?
I spent 3 months with him.
Yes. What is your bottom line appraisal of his story?
I would say the bottom line is I hope he is completely making this whole story up.
Really?
I hope he is, because it's an ugly story with terrible implications. But my fear is that there's probably a good portion of truth to it.
You use that word probably. That's very interesting, sir. Understand now, let me preface this. I think there are so many things that we don't know because our civilization and perhaps our own inbred fears don't want us to know.
Yeah.
So I am open to quite a few things. Nevertheless, I also know that some folks tend to do a lot of wishful thinking, and they do extrapolate things. And to be blunt about it, there's an awful lot of BSers around, especially as we know in the forest giant research field.
Yeah.
But when I listen to this, I don't close anything out. Nevertheless, I look back and I'm thinking, the first thing that comes to my mind is, in those years that he apparently vanished, first of all, are there any ways of checking to see through his Social Security number, et cetera, whether or not he was holding jobs from this place or that? Secondly, is there any way of looking into physical manifestations that would corroborate his claim that he vanished all this time?
Yeah, that would be hard to do, and I asked him, if he could give me some proof about things like that. In order for me to pursue it to that level, I probably would have had to have a significant budget to do traveling and research. It was a budget that I just didn't have. So the way I approached that was not by trying to dig up records, but by trying to talk to as many other people that I could, and then ask him about some things that were going to happen in the future. And so when I interviewed him, it was August, and there was a presidential presidential election coming right around the corner in a few months, and that was with George Bush and Al Gore. So here it was. It's going to be 2 or 3 months in the future, and I did the interview and I had the tape rolling, and I said, "Who's going to be our next president?" And I remember it very well. He said, I said, "Who's going to win?" And he said, "Nobody." And he just said that as a matter of fact. And I said, "Well, what do you mean?" And he said, "Well, he talked about Al Gore winning it, but then losing it, and he said it was eventually going to go to the Supreme Court," is what he said, and that they were going to give the presidents, let George Bush become the president. And he said that, and I thought, oh my God, I'm doomed, because it will never happen this way. And all this work that I put into these interviews is just right down the drain. And I was shocked to find out that about 90% of the way he described it is actually how it happened. So that was one thing that I did to try to test him out. Now, another thing that happened was 9/11 happened while I was still had a good relationship with him. And the day after that happened, he looked at me and told me that those buildings were blown up, and that he knew that for a fact. And I thought he was crazy. I mean, he would tell me these things, and I just thought he was crazy. So, at the time, if you asked me, did I believe him, I would say no. But as time has gone on, and there's been a lot of research that has been done, and really very good cases have been built that have shown that there's a good probability that there were explosives in those buildings, and that's what brought them down.
Well, is there if you can get his number, then maybe it finds you numbers.
Yeah, let me tell you what kind of happened between Al and me. Because Al and I don't talk to each other anymore. I don't know. You probably don't know all the... There was a big controversy there between him and I. And you find in this whole arena, there's a certain paranoia. And for a while, everybody in the circles that he ran in thought that I was a government agent, and that my job was to infiltrate their organization and bring everybody down. And there was a lot of people around Al. Al had a pretty big group of folks that really liked him, and they did everything they could to discredit me. So I, as a result of that whole thing, just backed off, and I haven't spoken to him in many, many years. So.
Yeah, I know. Sometimes those things do come in. I read the article that you published on that and your problems with him, and that can arise out of all sorts of things. And believe me, my heart goes out to you, because you can try to do some good things, but you've got an awful lot of people whispering in other people's ears, things like that.
Yeah.
But what I'm suggesting here is that we all had a number attached to us in the Navy, and for that matter, any other service member. And it would appear that the folks that were on board that same ship, that you could get a roster. That's number one. Number two is to verify that he is there. And you can do this all on the Internet. It isn't a matter of... because they've just posted it. In fact, I found myself. And they had me fairly accurate, by golly. I was on the Yorktown for training, and then the Princeton, the anti-submarine warfare aircraft carrier. But in any case, I might suggest that perhaps you may wish to do that, because from what you've told me, it sounds like you're kind of on the fence, because on one side you've had personal problems with this gentleman, but nevertheless you find that perhaps some of the things he said were true, and yet the Navy reports obviously, naturally, that no such experiment took place.
Yeah.
At the same time, we're faced with, there's nothing that I am aware of. And of course, I don't mind being an ignorant man. I don't want to be a stupid man, but an ignorant man just simply says, I don't know. But have these experiments been run in any other mode by any other armed force or science laboratory that have been able to duplicate or replicate something like this?
Well, I asked that same question to Al as well, and there was, I think I put it on my website, there was a Dr. Coram who was in West Virginia, and through the magic of the internet, I was able to find him and call him up with Al there. And Dr. Coram was a big Tesla fan, and was very interested in the Philadelphia experiment, and actually gave me a paper of he and his brother duplicated in a very small way the Philadelphia experiment in a laboratory, and published a paper and gave that whole paper to me. All that he did was made something disappear, I think, with the green fog and all the rest. As far as the time travel, I don't know. But Dr. Coram was very interesting in that he actually worked on propulsion systems for the next generation of spaceships that are out there. So, I found him. I put him on the web. I interviewed him, but he would not allow me to put that audio interview on the website.
Well, one thing, we do have a break coming up that we have to take.
Yeah.
Mr. Hipp, I think, will take care of that in about 3 minutes. Am I correct, Mr. Hipp?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now, until then, here's something I'm going to suggest that we pick up on the other side of the break, and that's this: the Russians. We are, in a sense, I can't say crippled, but we have a certain fence built around us that we have to be very careful of, and that is the Judeo-Christian approach to things and the biblical things, and we have to be very, very careful sometimes in broaching this, because we can't go beyond the teachings of certain areas without absolute positive proof. Therefore, we kind of have to take a step back from time to time from the Russians during the Soviet period, because they were not bound by those socio and religious boundaries. Therefore, it would appear to me, and I'm guessing here, but it would appear to me that the Russians would have been all over the concept of this experiment that had taken place in Philadelphia, purportedly, and that they would have taken that to the extreme. And they are, despite the fact that the gulags killed off so many thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of some of their finer minds, the minds that did survive were by no means stupid. And therefore, I would wonder why we would not run into someone in the Russian area that would not have replicated or duplicated this kind of experiment. So, after our break, which I think is coming up right now on our little radio show here, let's take that up, and we'll have a few moments in order to think about that. How's that sound?
Sounds good.
You're listening to the AARF show. The phone lines are now open. Call us at 718-508-9914. You can email your questions to us at aarfwebmaster@gmail.com or instant message your questions to us at AARF Show on your Yahoo Messenger.
are back.
I'm here.
All right, was that it?
That's it.
All right, Michael. What's your impression of what I said? Does that hold any water for you?
What you're asking about the Soviets, and I let my interviews go wherever they went, and we never actually. There was never any mention of a Soviet interest in any of this. It was primarily Operation Paperclip, which was the bringing over of the German scientists and the German gold to, I think it was Brookhaven or something, in Long Island, and then Montauk was the underground base where most of the stuff happened. But it was the Germans and it was the Americans, and together with the money that they had from a lot of stolen gold, were able to make this time travel stuff happen. I never once heard a mention of a Soviet interest in this. And I talked to a lot of people.
Yeah, and this is what's interesting, is because, of course, the Germans, we know that, and my being of Germanic heritage, I understand that they kicked some tail when it came to developing some things. Nevertheless, the Soviets were our equals in many, many areas, and they did not operate within the boundaries that we had, I guess you might say, placed upon ourselves. But it would appear to me that if such an experiment had been successful, the Soviets, number one, would have known about it, for sure. They had excellent spies, outrageously good. The KGB, etc., were extremely good. It would appear that they would have penetrated, they would have gathered the information, and then they would have duplicated. Yeah. Had they been able to duplicate such a thing, certainly we would have known about it by now. And obviously, no one, to my knowledge anyway, of course I'm limited, I'm asking you, you're the expert on this thing, because what I mean by that, of course, is you've been much more exposed to this. No one else has been able to duplicate this experiment, have they?
Well, it's hard to answer that question because I personally never saw any of this stuff happen. Okay, I never saw a time travel experiment happen or anything like that. And there was this one fellow that I interviewed, his name was Mark, and he was the guy who was in charge of the chair at Montauk. And through the chair, that's how the people did the time traveling. And he described a whole bunch of these experiments. And as I recall, was what happens, if you go back and change, let's just say John F. Kennedy, instead of him being killed, what happens if he lived? And, what happens to our memories? And so, his comment is that, instantly when you come back, all the memories that, you had of one thing are completely changed. That there are many different realities out there. And by them doing things in the past, when they come back, then everybody's memory is that John F. Kennedy never died. And it got very confusing. For me, it got very tough to try to figure this whole thing out. And what he said was that if you mess with time too much, then you cause rifts in a dimension. And apparently there were, as I recall, 11 or 12, 13 different dimensions. And if you play with it too much, then you could just, poof, you're gone out of here. It just is over with. And it's, you hear somebody talking about this stuff and you just shake your head because you can't prove it, but they look at you and they speak as if it's just, part of their every single day experience. And that's the part that's baffling for me was, how could this possibly be? But and And so I talked to Al, I talked to Mark, I talked to, 5 or 6 other people, because when I listened to Al, I didn't believe him. And I said, nobody's going to believe you. And I got a lot of people on the line and interviewed them and recorded their conversations as well. So.
Mm-hmm. Are you familiar with the works of Carlos Castaneda, by the way?
Carlos
Castaneda, yes. His first book was Don Juan, A Yaqui Way of Knowledge.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, and the second book was A Separate Reality. This is what drew my attention when you said that. We deal in 3 dimensions, and what we're talking about here is a 4th dimension. And I was the guy, by stupidity in a way, I wrote the original concept that was sold to a Florida producer who then took it to Hollywood and sold it for an awful lot of money. And it was called In Search Of. That was my concept to begin with.
Wow. It's a great concept, yeah.
And in any case, I guess you might say, an inquiring mind, and I don't put too many boundaries on it. I've freed myself of that many, many years ago. Nevertheless, being able to time travel disturbs me in this manner, and because it's to my infantile mind a bit of a problem, because we're saying that things are in a sense predetermined, and therefore this takes away free choice. This means that whatever will happen regardless of what we do, and therefore we're no longer a free choice, but mere puppets on a stage. And
unless everything happens.
Yeah. It's strange, though, isn't it? Because look at yourself. I mean, how has this, may I ask you, Michael, how has this affected your life and your outlook?
Well, Al told me when I proposed this project to him, and again, I proposed it just because I wanted to be an interviewer, and that was it. And he says, everybody that works with me, he says, their lives get ruined. And 2 months after this, I published my interviews. My wife left me. All my sources of income dried up, and I was
really,
yeah, and I was basically
ostracized.
I was ostracized from society, and I was broke. I mean,
yeah.
And prior to that, I was a fairly successful person. And so I basically had to pick up all the pieces of my life and start over again. And the funny thing was, is Al told me this would happen. So, but going back to your question, how has it affected you? I mean, I still believe if you have your health and if you have your mind, you can make it through anything. And
Michael, may I reach across the cyberspace and shake your hand? And just say just a couple of things that I think let me ask, not just you, but our audience, a couple of questions. And then I think we should take some calls, and don't you think, Bob? But here's what I'm going to ask. Show me one thing, physical, that you can take with you, one possession that you can take with you after the body dies. Because the answer is nothing. Obviously, we can't take a thing physical with us. Therefore, if we exist after this body dies, I don't believe souls die at all. I really don't believe, and I have reasons to believe this. But if we can be judged by anything, it's going to be not necessarily by our accomplishments, but our intent. And from what I'm hearing, Michael, and I don't know you, we stumbled across ourselves in a coffee shop, we passed by, but nevertheless, you sound like a man with an inquiring mind that has freed themselves from the boundaries of, what would you say, tradition. and therefore you would be punished. You would be punished, and this is to be expected by the loss of material things, because in effect, really, material things don't really mean a hell of a lot to you, do they, Michael?
No, not really anymore.
It's accomplishments by what we are going to be judged by, if we're judged at all. And in my humble opinion, I think the best judge of us is ourselves.
Yeah.
And therefore, we're not going to be judged in the afterlife. And we do live outside this body, I am absolutely confident. We'll be judged by not only what we accomplished, but what we intended to accomplish. And it sounds to me, like you, sir, are a gentleman who likes to turn over a rock to see what's on the underside, too. Does that sound right?
Yes. And
okay.
Finding easier ways to turn over the rock. Just because everybody turns it over this way, I turn it over that way.
Well, I'm glad to have met you. Now, let me ask, Mr. Hipp, do we have any people coming in that would like to ask this gentleman a question, please?
Yeah, Ken in California would like to know, is there any suggestion about alien intervention with this experiment, and was there anything to suggest the information from aliens aided in this experiment?
Yeah, the answer is yes, that it was, at the end of the day, it was all orchestrated by aliens. And the purpose of it was to cause a tear in space-time so that they could come here en masse. And that at Montauk, Al actually met with he was a reptilian, I believe, who was in charge of the whole project. And so that was the purpose. So everything else was sort of orchestrated, but as a result of them. According to Al, that's what he said.
Wow.
Okay, Bob, what else do you have?
Sam in Illinois would like to know, what happened to the two brothers after this experiment? Were there any contact with them?
Okay, the two brothers. Okay, Duncan Cameron was the one that jumped off the ship right before it materialized and went into 1983. He went back. And he was the fellow that was used for the most part in the time travel experiments. And apparently, let's see, he several times almost died. I actually talked to him on the telephone and recorded that interview with Duncan. But Duncan is as Duncan was back then. Now, and he is a very difficult person to talk to. If you ask him a question, you're just not sure about the answer that comes back to you. So that was Duncan. Now, Al Bielek was the other brother. However, Al Bielek was, as the other brother, age regressed back into a small child, and then that small child was named Al Bielek, and he grew up in a different family as a different person. And the reason why they didn't kill him, he says, is because that would cause a problem with the timeline. So he had to be kept alive while, throughout the time period that he had jumped around in. That's a short answer to, there's a lot more to that, but that should give you a quick answer. You there?
Yes.
Yeah, next question, Robert.
Okay.
Larry in New Mexico would like to know, do you have any more information on the MONTAUK-Project?
Well, there's... do you have 100 hours? I mean, there's a vast amount of information on the MONTAUK-Project. It started out as a project for mind control. That was the idea about it. And it turned into time travel, just like, the Philadelphia experiment. it started out as invisibility and it turned out to time travel. So, you know, they start out one way, they do the experiments, and other things appear.
I'm very familiar with both of these stories. I read quite a bit on both of them. I know up in Montauk there was a many series of experiments that, according to the different websites, had all gone horribly wrong or horribly well, depending on the point of view you had.
Yeah.
And same thing with the Philadelphia experiment. You know, you had the stories of the crewmen who were melded into the steel,
right,
and screaming in pain, and put away and institutionalized, never to be heard from again, you know, to keep the story secret. How do we know what's true and what isn't? The one thing we do know in that time period, there were absolutely technologies being developed in ways that had never been done before in the history of man. They had just, come up with the atomic stuff. They were inventing doing all kinds of experiments with radar and sonar. And it seems very feasible that they could have done something like that.
Yeah, but they did it to a really extreme and grotesque level. Apparently they had to do something with young boys at Montauk, and it was through a homosexual act of creating fear through young boys.
Oh, my.
That they were able to take that fear as it radiated and capture it into a computer program. So that it translated that energy into a program. And it was through that they were able to do mind control and ultimately time travel. And that's where it got grotesque, because in that process, according to the testimony, many, many thousands of these young boys basically died.
Wow, that's just crazy.
Yeah, that was the part that was disturbing for me. Was that whole the homosexual stuff was used to invoke fear or some other thing. I don't recall. But
I personally never read that particular angle of it. I read different things, that involved different types of drugs and electromagnetic fields.
No, that was the big thing, and that's what Al told me. And I'm pretty sure Al is homosexual. He never told me that, but he would show me pictures of a man that he never had a woman that I can recall. And I think that somehow this whole thing moves your energy that way. I'm having a hard time verbalizing, but I'm just saying there's something. If further research were to be done, it would be to try to uncover that link.
Greg in Maryland would like to know, did the brother who went to 1982 comment on what he saw in 1982 when he came back?
Well, it was 1983, I believe. But when he came back, he was only on the ship for a short while. That would be Duncan. And he helped to destroy the control panels. And then right before reality materialized, he jumped off. So I don't think he said much during that time. Am I talking about the right brother here? Or is he interested in Al? Because Al talked about when he was there how they saw color TV and they had never seen color TV before. What else? They saw a helicopter, which they had never seen before.
Yeah, that was the right brother, it says.
Okay. Yeah, Duncan is kind of I only talked to him. I talked to him a couple of times, and I almost had to beg him to go on he just didn't want to talk at all. He wanted to try to put all this behind him. Very difficult person to talk to. but he did believe he was part of it, and he did believe that Al was his brother at that time. So he confirmed that to me. You know, I found the interesting thing was when they talked about the further future, the 2137 that they both went to. And that was, I can't believe I remember all this stuff. But at that point, there was 200 million people on the planet, and that people lived on these cities that were anti-gravitational. So they would float, and when they got tired of one location, they would float it to the next location. And Al said that he spent, I believe, a couple months there, and his job was a tour guide, of all things. But they had floating cities, and that there was a computer that was in charge of everything, and the people that made the computer were called the wing makers. And there was, if you do research on the wing makers, they're presented as people from the future. So he said he met the wing makers.
Okay, John. Louise in South Carolina would like to know how many sailors were on the ship during the experiment.
Louise, I'm sorry, I don't know the answer to that. I would think it'd be over 100. I mean, it was oh, wait a minute. If I recall, it was a skeleton cruise, what he said. It was a skeleton cruise. So now one of them, there was a third brother, and I forget his name, but he was actually outside the control area, and he was the one that was melded into the hull of the ship when it reappeared. The exact number I don't recall.
Wow. Now, that's something, the stories that I always wondered about was that, you know, the blending of flesh and metal.
Yeah.
What kind of molecular processes have to happen to make that occur, and, you know, if it can occur. And that's one of the particularly frightening aspects of that experiment, if in fact it did take place.
Yeah.
It's just horrific.
Yeah, I mean, what that would mean is that everything is just energy controlled by thought. And so, you know, apparently if you put the right amount of energy to matter or whatever, you could do this with anything. You know, since that time, I did talk, you know, I had a lot of people, since I have that website, that Bielek.com website and all, I had a whole bunch of people call me up and say, and I remember one fellow described pretty well about people who had these suits that you could just put on and become invisible. I heard a lot of those testimonies. And they, you know, they sound pretty believable, so who knows?
Helen in Florida would like to know, was the equipment on the ship or, like, you know, next to it or some distance away from the ship when the experiment was actually occurring? Was it on board or, you know, or at a location?
Oh, yeah. It was, well, the very first experiment was actually, it was on board, but it was, all the power was run to the ship. And I think the experiment failed. But the experiment that we're talking about here, the Philadelphia experiment, everything was contained within the ship itself. So the power was generated internally from the ship, and then there was a structure on the front and a structure on the back. And it created, I believe the word is colloidal fields.
Yeah, that's the way it was portrayed in the movie also.
Yeah, that's how he described it. And it was like donut colloidal fields.
And I know it involves a lot of energies, you know, like with magnetic fields and things and frequencies that have to do, like with Tesla-type studies. And
right.
And I remember even reading that Einstein had been brought in at one point
right.
to lend some of his thoughts on it.
Einstein was involved in the very beginning, and Tesla was involved. Actually, Tesla started out and with the project, and Al said he booby-trapped it and actually made it fail and then got out of the project, the first one. I forget his reasoning to do that. And then Einstein was involved, and then the one who actually ran the thing was a fellow named John von Neumann. You ever heard that name?
Yes, yeah.
Okay, so von Neumann was the fellow that carried it all the way through. And in fact, when they went to 1983, they met John von Neumann there at Montauk.
Dave in Chicago would like to know, does anyone know how much power was required to make all of this happen?
I don't, Al would probably know that. I don't recall that number.
I have no idea, but my guess would be something in the gigawatt range.
Yeah, it was a lot. And I remember Al telling me that apparently the reason why they were able to figure this out is because Einstein did figure out the unified theory.
Yeah, unified field theory.
Field theory, and it had something to do with gravitation. That gravitation was an energy. And once they figured out how to work with gravity as an energy, they were able to do this.
I had always read that the whole experiment was based on the unified field theory.
Yeah, that's what he said. I'm going back in my memory bank, so may get a fact or two wrong, but I'm pretty sure that's what he said. And I'm not a physicist, so I'm just kind of going from memory here. These are good questions here.
I think we have a caller, too. Richard Van Dyke down there in Texas might have a question he wants to ask. Richard, are you there?
Hey, yes, I am. Sam.
Hi, Richard.
How are you doing, Michael?
Good, thank you.
I've got a question that it seems to me that if all of this was in fact true, and I'm posing it to you like this, is if all of this were in fact true, wouldn't it make everything that Carlos Asande said back in the 50s true as well?
I don't know everything that he said.
Carlos Asande was the one that actually started bringing this to light in the early 50s and started, in fact, he actually went into books and started reading some science fiction books.
Yeah.
And started scribbling in the margins and started sending them off to some naval officers and stuff up in the intelligence field. And there have been several books on him, and I think his real name was, it turns out he had several aliases, but I think his real name was Carl Allen, and he was from up in Pennsylvania somewhere, if I'm not
Wasn't it Allende?
Yeah.
Allende, yeah. Well, Asande and Allende were two of his aliases.
Yeah, I know he used like 3 or 4 different ones.
Yes.
I know he went by Carl Allen and Carlos Allende, I believe, for a couple of them.
Yeah. Now, Al, that was an angle to the story I didn't dive deep into, but Al did describe it to me, and he actually said he met him. And if I recall correctly, he said he was right. And there were a lot of different, Phil Schneider. You may have heard that name.
Yeah.
His dad was the medical officer for the ship. That would be another angle that would help verify this. But that was a very deep part. That whole Carlos thing, and there was much more to it than just him. And I regret that I didn't really get into that really deep, because that seemed to be where it would be very interesting.
Well, I read the book that was written back in the late 70s or 80s or early 80s, I believe it was, about this, and it was based all on that stuff, the Carlos Allende thing, and one of the things that he tried to use to substantiate in his version of the story, it appeared at Philadelphia and then down at Norfolk and then back to Philadelphia.
Right.
And one of the things he tried to substantiate was that there was a ship, a merchant ship, that had passed them while they were doing the experiment out in the bay or whatever.
Yeah, he was actually a merchant marine.
Yeah, and and he used to try name this ship all the time, and he said that you could, you know, get witnesses that could verify that you know, that they were on this merchant ship and had seen this happen and stuff. But, you know, it's just like a lot of these kind of stories, you know, the information you get back is very, it's very hard to prove.
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, we're probably never going to get hard proof on this, on the Philadelphia experiment. We're not going to get hard proof on the Montauk-Project or any of this other stuff. But what I find is, as I go through life, certain events just start making sense to me, which normally would not have made sense because I went through this experience. That's how, you know, it has helped me because, you know, in a way, you know, life is sort of painted for us, and we don't understand why it is. But like I told you about 9/11 and mind control, you can sort of see how mind control is working, and really that was the bigger thing that Al wanted to talk about, was mind control and how we are all sort of a byproduct of it, and how to get out of it too. He used to do different tests on me to determine if I was a mind control subject or not, and turned out I wasn't. So.
Interesting.
Yeah.
But he was very paranoid, wasn't he?
Al was, he was, on one hand, you know, I really liked Al a lot. But when I interviewed him, he would come to my office, and I worked in a group. We had about 40 of us there. And I remember when he would leave, we'd go into the kitchen. There'd be no food left. He would eat everything. Real nice guy, but he presented himself as like a 3-star general. But he was a pauper. He had nothing. You know, he had this car that he drove up in, and you know, it'd break down, and I'd have to help him fix it. I got him on 2 or 3 different television programs, the History Channel and Grizzly Adams Production, things like that, and just the clothes that he wore was terrible. I'd have to go out and buy some clothes for him to be on television. So he was, on one hand, extremely interesting, but his personal life, it was just terrible, a tatters. So he was a mystery to me.
Robert, excuse me for interrupting, but are we out of time?
Yes, sir. We have come to the end of the show, that sad time of evening.
Unfortunately.
Oh, my God.
I hate when this time shows up.
Yeah, well, that's the way it always is with Marines.
Well, you know, Robert, I tried to take up for you while you were gone. Jimmy and Bob kept saying you were driving a taxi in Tijuana, and I took up for you. I told
How did you know that? You're the guy that didn't tip. I remember you, yeah. Anyway, thank you so very much, sir. I appreciate you coming on, and we really need to bring you back. I really want to hear some more. But unfortunately, we are on a time frame that we have to live by. But would you mind coming back, Michael?
Yeah, just give me a holler, and we'll find a free time for all of us.
Fantastic. And thank you, Mr. Hip. And, of course, that jarhead down there, we have to say thanks to him.
Thank you for having me. Robert, if you would, when you get a chance, I think you've got my phone number here. If you would, give me a holler. Luke's got some very interesting stuff I'd like to tell you about, and he's interested in you having a look at it as well.
All right, buddy. I'll be in contact rather soon. Thank you very much to our audiences everywhere, and tune in, please, next week. We will continue this odyssey. Bye-bye.
All right. Good night, everybody.
Good show, Michael.